All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. All right, first we are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could all please stand. All right, welcome everyone to today's board meeting. Today is June 20th. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Item 2.01, Superintendent's Report.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Board of Education. First off, we have Lee Summit North Track Team, and we're going to recognize you guys here in a second, but I'm glad you guys came. So they are state champs, and we're going to recognize them at the next agenda item. We had another team bring home a Final Four trophy, and that's Lee Summit High School's girls soccer team. They made it to the Final Four and finished third in the state. So congratulations to them and their efforts over in Fenton, Missouri. They had to go all the way to Fenton to play Blue Springs South in the third place game. Congratulations to the 164 first, third, fifth, and eighth graders. That's right, 164 of them, who earned their Seal of Biliteracy Pathway Awards. The award recognizes students who have demonstrated they've learned and acquired a second language that meets district and state standards. 26 of those students are earning their award for a second time, and 7 of them for a third time. So congratulations to them. LSR7 foreign language students are having an exciting time abroad. So the French students just got back from a 6-day trip in France. And we currently have our German students over in Germany, and soon will be in Switzerland. So they're wrapping up their trip right now. So kudos to them for stretching their wings and doing something new. As we approach the 24-25 school year, annual registration is a month away. Online registration opens on July 19th. I need to put that on my own calendar. You'll start to notice more information over the next month about what to expect, how to prepare, and where to go with questions. You can start by pulling your child's proof of address, proof of age, and immunization record so they're ready to upload next month. Announcements-wise, if you're planning to visit the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art anytime this summer, you're going to see 2 Lee Summit West students' artwork, Frankie Hill and Keely Goodwin, so please stop by and see their artwork. Best of luck to our students participating in the state-sponsored enrichment programs, Missouri Scholars Academy and Missouri Fine Arts Academy. I drove by MSA in Columbia the other day. Missouri Fine Arts is down in Springfield. They spend 3 weeks on college campuses. It's both of them are fantastic programs. One's been around since 1985. The other one, I think it's been around since 1989. A reminder that next week is the last week for free summer meals at Meadow Lane Elementary. That means breakfast is available from 8:30 to 9 a.m. and lunch from noon to 1 if you're a 18-year-old or younger. No income or registration requirements are required, but all meals must be eaten at the school. So if you had football practice and want to head over there for breakfast after football practice in the morning or something like that, you certainly could do so. We want to invite any interested businesses to participate in our annual Convocation Vendor Fair. So we'll have Convocation on August 14th. It starts at 9 a.m., but the vendor fair is from 8 to 9 a.m. All we ask is you make a $25 donation to the Lee Summit Education Foundation, and you can come and have 3,000 employees walk by your table. If you need more information, reach out to our Director of PR, Katie Bergen. That concludes my superintendent's report, Ms. President.
Item 3.01, we're going to recognize the Lee Summit North High School track team state champions.
So, the Lee Summit North boys track and field team capped off a successful 2024 season with a convincing win over the rest of the state at the state championships in Jefferson City Memorial Day weekend. The Broncos kicked off the meet with an outstanding performance by Isaiah Horde, who secured 4th place in the triple jump on Friday. The rest of the team also qualified for the finals in each of their events that day. On Saturday, the dynamic duo of Frank Sparks and Devin Mathis dominated the 110-meter hurdles with Frank taking 5th place and Devin winning the state title. Frank then immediately competed in the long jump, where he also placed 5th, earning more valuable points for the team. Next, the 4x200 meter relay team of Devin Mathis, Logan Mayfield, Zach Paul, and PK Newberry triumphed, having set a new Missouri record in the event the day before. Zach Paul continued the momentum in the 400 meters, taking 4th place after breaking the school record the previous day. Devin Mathis showcased his prowess again in the 300 meter hurdles, clinching his 3rd gold medal of the day. He took the lead right at the finish, breaking both the school record and setting a new Class 5 state record. PK Newberry then delivered a remarkable performance in the 200 meters, coming out of nowhere to take 4th place in an event where he wasn't even ranked in the top 10 before the state meet. Finally, the 4x400 meter relay team of Zach Paul, Mason Stanfield, Brandon Marshall, and Devin Mathis overtook their crosstown rival, Lee Summit, at the finish line to claim 1st place. They set a new school record and capped off a thrilling team championship in style. The following results were all contributions to the overall champion win. Devin Mathis, state champion, 110 meter hurdles, 300 meter hurdles, member of both state championship relays, 4x200 meter and 4x400 meter. Isaiah Horde, 4th place in triple jump. Jeremiah Mangles, 1st place para 100, para 200, para 400. Brendan Marshall, member of state champion 4x400 meter relay. Logan Mayfield, member of state champion 4x200 meter relay. Kevin Newberry, 4th place in the 200 meter, member of state champion 4x200 meter relay. Zach Paul, 4th place in the 400 meter, member of both state champion relays 4x200 meter and 4x400 meter. Frank Sparks, 5th place in the long jump, 5th place in 110 meter hurdles. Mason Stanfield, member of state championship 4x400 meter relay. Congratulations to the following members of the coaching staff: Coach Eric Davis, Coach Greg Surface, Coach Madison Granello, Coach Chris Armstrong, Coach Luke Williams, Coach Katie Kelly, Coach Jalen Ford, Coach Rebecca Nelson, Coach Shannon Moore. Congratulations.
Board members, if you can come around, we're going to present something to the team here and get a picture. But Coach Davis, while we're having them come around, can you come to the mic and introduce who you have here today?
Yeah, so we have Coach Greg Surface over here. He coaches our horizontal jumpers, the triple jumpers, and the long jumpers. Then we got Frank Sparks. This is PK Newberry. This is Devin Mathis, and this is Logan Mayfield, who is only a freshman, so you'll probably see him some more down the road.
I am going to tell you to squeeze in for sure. No question. Ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, item 4.01, board committee reports.
All right, let's start with Board Member Haley.
There, how's that? We attended the robotics competition up at the North Kansas City High School here a couple weeks ago, and that was very impressive. I continue to be amazed by those kids and the work. And if you ask them a question, be prepared for the answer because they can give it to you. So that was exciting. I've really enjoyed following those kids.
Thank you. Did you have any board committees that you attended this month?
Yeah, we had a finance committee meeting today. I think that was the only one, actually.
Thank you. Board Member Miller?
So I haven't had any committees since May, I guess was our last one. So the only things I have are the 4 graduations and our board retreat, which was amazing. So yeah, it's a short month.
Thank you. Board Member Garrett?
Thank you. Well, I just went to the Lee Summit Educational Foundation committee meeting, and not a whole lot to report there. They're just kind of throwing around ideas right now, and we had some new board members, so I got a chance to meet them. And then earlier in the month, we had the CSDGKC, sorry about that. That's the Cooperating School Districts of Greater Kansas City. And it was a dinner, and we were able to kind of get an update on legislation, and that was about it.
Thank you. Board Member Johnson?
Yeah, so I attended the insurance meeting. At this insurance meeting, we went over medical plans. So every 3 years, they get bids for medical plans. They did narrow it down to one. They had good evidence as to why they picked the one that they did. So we'll be staying the course with the company that is currently serving our patients, our employees. And this will be coming to us at a work session in August and at our board meeting in August.
Thank you. Board Member Myers?
I attended the 4 graduations and the board retreat.
Thank you. Vice President Eslick?
Okay, I attended the Government Relations Committee meeting. And the focus of that meeting this month was really around the CIP is Community Improvement Project, I think. But it's $720 million of a 4 or 5 year plan the city has, and all of the projects that they're doing. Some of them include the hangar that we are partnering with the city on for our aerospace program. And then I'm sure if you've been to downtown, you know about Downtown Market Plaza. So those are a couple of the projects that fall in there. There's a lot of road and infrastructure improvements. So it was a really great update, and I won't go into a lot of detail because one thing that they did share with us is the city has a really great website where you can, as a city member, engage with project status updates. So they've done a really good job not only of communicating everything to the public, but making it very transparent where everything is at. So I'm sure everybody's really excited about all the great progress that the city is doing. So other than government relations, finance committee, along with Bill, we're going to talk a lot about probably the budget, which really we talked quite a bit about during the finance committee meeting, and I think we're probably going to have some dialogue about it today. But of course, there's a lot of concern, I know for me personally, just about what's going to happen with the lawsuit that's going on with Jackson County and the Attorney General, and how our assessment went this past year. So that could really negatively impact the district, and some of the concerns I shared were around what are we doing for contingency planning just in case this doesn't go the way that we hope it would go, and what we're going to do to manage our cost containment, potentially cost cutting, but we need to be thinking about those things. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that when we get to our budget, but that consumed kind of the bulk of the finance committee. The only other couple of things that we talked about, I'll just highlight one that's in we're not really planning to talk about it, but I'll just bring it up for the benefit of the rest of the board. We talked for a little while, and I'm only talking about a lot of this right now because the meeting was this morning, and I don't know how many people were actually able to watch the finance committee ahead of the board meeting because it was a long one. So we're doing a pilot program at Miller Park for safe audio enhancement. So it's audio enhancement in the classrooms, but also kind of like a panic button, really, for the lack of a better word for it, for our staff members in the building. So if there's a problem in the classroom, they're able to push the button, and the system has a way of being able to locate the the room that that staff member is in, and be able to reach them and send support or whatever that staff member might need. So from a safety perspective, I think this is a really great investigation that we're doing into how it works. But it is a pilot program for Miller Park specifically because it is a pricey program, pricey piece of equipment, rather, that would be expensive overall and could potentially be something we explore in a future bond. So that was one that we spent a little bit of time talking through. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I attended the board leadership meeting, and then I also attended the government relations meeting. And the one highlight that I just wanted to kind of bring to everyone's attention that I really appreciated was if you've ever, driven down the street and you see some development starting, and you're like, I wonder what they're building there, you can go on the city website and find out. And that's all I have for my report.
Okay. Item 5.01, approve the transfer of funds.
Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the transfer of $6,880,759.15 from the general fund to the special revenue fund.
Second.
Okay, motion and second. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 5.02, approve treasurer's report and the payment of the bills.
Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the treasurer's report and the payment of the bills.
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
5.03, amend the budget for 2023 to 2024.
Can I get a motion?
I move to amend the 2023-2024 budget as presented.
That's contagious, yeah. Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
5.04, preliminary budget for 2024-2025.
Can I get a motion?
I move that the board approve the 2024-25 preliminary budget as presented.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there any discussion on this one before we vote?
Can we, yes. Yes. Slow down. Well, I already said a lot about the budget, but I don't know if anybody has any other concerns, or I don't want to dominate, so I'm going to just sit back.
Dr. Buck?
If you want, Nathan Holder can give you the highlights. He did go in depth in Finance Committee. The big thing to point out is that we lowered our tax rate around 60 cents last September, and to address the fact that assessed valuation made the huge leap it did in 2023. That allowed us to be exactly where we should be had that giant assessment hadn't gone up, but the transfer we did went through. So we voluntarily rolled back 60 cents. We didn't need to do so. I'm rounding off, it's not exactly 60 cents. But by doing so, then people are appealing. Some of that money then hasn't come in that was budgeted. We're about $5 million short coming in from local funds. So that's going to lower what you just approved in amended budget. We'll be in the 27% range probably for reserves. It's $8 million more than it was 4 years ago, but it's a lower percent because the budget's bigger, if that makes sense. So we went from 64 million to 72 million at reserves is what the prediction will be. Again, we're not to June 30th, so June 30th is the official date. But with that 5 million drop, we are in the 27% range. So we've tightened the belt. You're seeing the 27% again at the end of next year, assuming nothing out of the norm happens again. So that's a piece that I wanted to throw out there that we did not know at this time last year. We didn't know this time last year the assessed valuation was going to make a big jump. We didn't know that we were going to have rolled back 60 cents. We didn't know that the county's withholding about $5 million that we thought we'd have by this point. So those are all factors we didn't know in June that we do know now.
Is there anything that you would like to share?
would you like me to roll through this? Okay. So I will try to present somewhat of a condensed version of the Finance Committee meeting this morning. When Ms. Eslick said that it was a long meeting, what she didn't say it was because of me. So I'll do my best.
I didn't want to blame you, you know.
It was my fault, I admit it. So very quickly, what we just approved for the 23-24 budget amendment, just a note, this is really just an FYI. Legally, in Missouri, you're required to amend the budget to make sure that your budgeted expenses, that your actual expenses, don't exceed your budgeted expenses. So you're not required to adjust your revenue. That's not part of the state statute, but we generally do, just to give an update, because it's important, because it will affect our ending balances, how much revenue we take in versus what our expenses were. And then just to note, just remember, we get our audit in September. That will be presented to the board in December, and that is when our fund balances actually become final after the review of everything. So our revenue changes, as Dr. Buck mentioned, they're significant in the incidental fund. We are actually over $5 million below what we anticipated just from Jackson County. Cass is running closer to where we thought, but it is even a little bit under what we thought it would be. So not completely unexpected, but it was unexpected that it's at the level that it was. So there's a variety of reasons for that. Some we know, some we don't know. We know that there are certainly a significant number of protests that may have even been resolved, but the State Tax Commission has not certified those. So that's one of the reasons why some of that money may have not been released yet to the school districts. We've been told that there will be another big release tomorrow. I did not get an email. Usually we get an email on Thursday afternoon that alerts us to what that will be, because it's just a direct deposit into our account, and we didn't. So that is a little unusual, but we'll see what tomorrow brings. And typically we do receive a disbursement every Friday. So there are 2 weeks left, but I can say with 99% confidence we will fall short with our revenue projection. And that's the primary reason. So as you look there across the page, you see really the impact of that for the operating funds, and that's why we put the incidental fund and the teachers fund together, because those make up our operating expenses. And then the capital projects fund, we did exceed revenue in that area, primarily due to the merchants and manufacturing tax, as well as some CNG tax credits that we received back that go into Fund 4, to the capital projects fund. Debt service is lower. Again, that's the same reason that the incidental fund is lower. Those two are very much tied to that. And then restricted funds are a little bit lower. You'll also notice on the next slide that the expenses are lower. That's due to two primary reasons. One, our nutrition revenue was not what we originally anticipated that it would be. And then two, our before and after school revenue. And that's really not a problem. That's just a function of as that program wraps fully into the YMCA, we don't receive as much reimbursement as we did, say, in August for the number of employees that we had that were still LSR7 employees. So overall, you see the revenue picture. On the next slide, you see expenditures. So I always caution here that in LSR7, we are a little bit unique, at least from my past experiences, in that we amend the budget, and it's still that. It's a budget. We don't amend to actual, which is more common in other places throughout the state. As a result of that, we typically try to be a little bit conservative in terms of what we have budgeted in those areas. Each year, this is my third year, we try to fine tune that a little bit, but there are always things that come up. We have 10 payrolls left to run for June, July, the different semi-monthly payrolls, people that are retiring, leave payouts, all that happens in the next 6 business days in our district. And so we can project, and we do, but then we always, there are different factors that play into that. How many employees took early checks? Because we expense the checks in June, but typically, teachers in particular, receive a July paycheck that's still part of this school year. Then the new checks start in August. Staff members, and not just teachers, but anybody that's paid on that cycle, can elect to receive a check in May that is their July check. Then they receive a check in June. Then they don't receive one in July. So we refer to that as early checks. The number of people that select that, and this year was about 40 more, can have a definite impact when you're looking at projecting from year to year, because that's going to impact your June for the current year. So all those factors go in to say we are projecting higher expenses. Part of it is operating, part of it is salary and benefits. And really the salary and benefits piece is we focus on that, and especially, you know, looking out into the future, all right? We know that that's 82% of our operating budget. And so when you see expenses that are a little bit higher than what you anticipated, that's where we have to go in and look at not only next year, but the year after, and start to think about that in just the way that we operate in general. Supplies and purchase services, you can pull back on that a little bit. You can't really control utilities. At least the inflationary increases that you see in that, you can't really control inflationary supply increases, but you can control amounts, right? Or maybe you hold off on a purchase. So those are a little bit more within your control from a year-to-year basis. But salaries and benefits are 82% of it. So I will say, when you look at our total expense budget, all right, the variance being $5.3 million in what we're asking to amend the budget to. Probably, it's safe to say, well over 60% of that is just an adjustment on supplies and purchase services. And we've been previewing that in our finance committee meeting with the incidental fund. The rest of it, the 30 to 35%, is going to be salaries and benefits. But the key is, and what we will really analyze in July, is where does it end actually at the end of June? And so that then informs us on as we go into next year. Because remember, we're trying to put a little bit in there to make sure that we don't exceed those expenses. It's been a different year with revenues, right, as we know that. So that's probably, I've tried to tighten it to be as close as possible, but then also give a little bit of breathing room. But in a district our size, things come through, and so it makes me a little nervous to not put a little bit of cushion in there. Capital projects, I feel good with that. We've lowered that expense just slightly. We should end below there. Debt service, we didn't change at all. Restricted, we lowered slightly. Again, just a little aggressive in our predictions, primarily centered around nutrition services and BASS. Just a reminder, and again, an FYI, those restricted funds that you see there, all of that does play into our operating reserve, right? Even though they're restricted, the way that the state looks at it, that is part of our ASBR ending fund balance. Bond fund, we do predict that we will have a bond balance, which is not a bad thing. We were just hoping to be able to close that out this fiscal year. But we do certainly anticipate closing that out in July or August. And just remember, those are all capital expenses, and so that's really the way that we'll be looking at it, especially in July and August. Most of our projects are tied up or finished, is a better way to say it. But there is always some contingency that's the last thing that we pay out. And there's still a little work that has been ongoing at places like Miller Park. So it just takes time, They don't finish and then we pay them the next week. It takes a little time, and it's okay to take that time. We don't want to rush it just for the sake of the end of the fiscal year. So really, everything that I've just described is what you see there on the final budget amendment. You can see that the lack of revenue, again, with our budgeted expenses, causes us to drop. Now, 76.9 to just over 72 million. 72 million is still a very healthy fund balance. It's just that we would not want to see, again, a significant drop in the next fiscal year. And I certainly don't anticipate that we will, with the exception that was mentioned with the current litigation. I mean, that could cause a drop in fund balances. But if that's not what happens, then we feel pretty good about being able to remain right in that 27% range. Normally, I would say with quite a bit of confidence that 27.38 is real close, because I might be a little low here and a little high there, and it'll even out. We're going to be pretty close to 27.38. I don't have as much confidence this year. It's not going to be significant. You're not going to see a percent drop. But it certainly could be a little bit lower, but it could be a little bit higher. It's just a unique situation that we have this year as compared to most past years. All right, just some history there, operating fund balance. You can see typically the last 12 years we ran in the 30s. We did have 3 years where we dropped down just below 30. You got to go back to 9, 10, 10, 11 to see fund balances that were below 25%. So again, our goal for 24-25 is to stay right in that 27% range. And in the larger budget document I referenced several times, 25% is our CSIP goal, which is our board-approved budget balance for operating reserves. So we will always try to stay above that amount.
Nathan, if you can stay right there. So earlier you heard me say we had 64 million when you see that 29% there 4 years ago, and now we have 72 million reserves and it's 27%. Well, how can it be $8 million more, but yet 2% points lower? Our budget's bigger, especially this year because we had a large raise this year for staff because we did the transfer. So we have a bigger budget and expense-wise. So even though there's $8 million more, percent-wise, it's less.
That's correct. And the other thing that I would say, just remember that the budget that we approved, originally we were going to be in the 30s. We anticipated that our reserves would drop. It was planned. We just didn't anticipate that the revenue side of it would fall as short as it did. That's why you have reserves. I mean, ultimately, that's in all seriousness, that is why you carry a reserve. So looking at the revenue budget, assessed value, I'm just projecting that to be flat. I really anticipate existing assessed values will go down. We know that through the appeal process, that our normal assessed value, so in other words, properties that were assessed in 2023, we'll see a reduction, almost certainly, in those areas. But new construction and any new personal property that comes on, that is estimated to hopefully at least make up the difference. The county is typically slower in rolling on new construction. So we know that new construction has slowed in 2024 and in especially the latter part of 2023. But if you drive around Lee Summit, you still see things that are being built, homes, businesses, and also we know that there is always the possibility, and in a non-reassessment year, typically, because they're less focused on the actual reassessment, that new construction, we see more of that in a non-reassessment year. So that historically, that's what happens. Prop C is helping us. That is budgeted at 1,500. The state's estimating 1,515, so I'm just coming in slightly under that. But state revenue will be up. The federal's a little lower, basically just because our ESSER money, which we actually received most of that last fiscal year, but we still received more this year than we will next fiscal year. So our federal revenue is going to go back down to a more normal level. Then the basic formula increase. It went from 6375 to 6760 per ADA. That's helping us. What that is doing really is it's not just mitigating the drop in ADA from 2019-20, which we were under as part of the pandemic provision. It is helping us, even though our ADA is lower in 23-24 than 19-20. It's still helping us. We also, because of the new formula, will get a little bit of weighted ADA. At least Summit has never had weighted ADA before, but they dropped the free and reduced lunch threshold down to 13, 15, off the top of my head, I don't know the exact amount, but extremely low. It used to be up around 30%. So all those factors weigh in. Now, a caveat, and we have to remember this, and I will repeat this a lot in Finance Committee as we go through the year. We will be unique in 2024-25 because we are all but certain to estimate our ADA. Why? Because of the preschool. Because we count ADA as part of the preschool, but preschool doesn't start until next school year. So in Missouri, you are allowed, and districts that are growing typically do this, they will estimate their ADA at the end of the school year so they can get paid in that fiscal year for those students. We haven't done that. Lee's Summit may have done that, 5, 7, 10 years ago. We haven't been in a position to do that. Number one, we've been under the pandemic provision since 1920. And two, our enrollment is just flat during that time period. So we will be doing that. But what that means is we won't get that payment until June. So when you see state revenues, you will see that lag most of the year. And we'll really see that is in Fund 2. They will be behind percentage-wise, but then we'll catch up. Fund 1, it really won't have any impact. And the other funds, it should not either. It would all be a Fund 2 impact. And then federal there, just note, we are finishing up the ESSER 3, the ARP funding. There's some small ancillary grants, teacher retention grant. We're mainly finished with those, but those are a very small piece of that is in this budget. So when you look at the sources of revenue, what you see from the federal level and the county level is really very accurate in what we would anticipate seeing going forward. The state is up, actually, but of course our local is still the largest percentage of our budget, and it makes sense. So when local revenue lags, we're going to see the largest impact. Federal revenue lags, minimal. You might not even notice. State, we'd feel a little bit, but again, nothing like local. So that just shows you the impact of those revenue pieces.
Mr. Holder, before
Yeah.
you move on, just back to I'm looking at the budget book, so I don't know if you have that in front of you or you're going to be able to answer this question, but you laid out combined funds revenue in the budget schedules, and so it has an annual comparison from 2022, 2023 school year, and now what's budgeted for 24-25. And I know you had said you budgeted a flat property tax. So from 23-24 to what's budgeted, it looks like a little less than a $4 million increase, $157 million to $161 for the next school year. So what is that
So
accounting for, I guess, is the question.
you do get to increase your collections by the same rate as inflation. So whatever the inflation is on December 31st prior, so DESI's probably already released that, we're allowed to, and then any new construction will be above and beyond that. So you get, because they weren't on tax rolls before, so you always will have an increase in non-assessment years. So with that, if for some reason the assessed valuation dropped, your tax rate will go up a little bit to offset that, so you can get to the.
You're saying that that difference, that increase, is not due to assessed value, it's due to the tax rate.
It'll be two things. One, the inflation rate, and we get to capture that. And two, if we have increases, and two, new construction. That'll be all new to the books. So those will be the two pieces. And he's estimating that because he doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, obviously, we don't know the new construction yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's exactly right.
Okay.
New construction, new personal property we get to keep. We do get to keep up with inflation, which is 3.4 was the CPI in December. And then I am anticipating a little bit higher collection just in terms of catch-up. And that'll come in mainly in the form of delinquent, probably.
Right.
But, so yeah, all of that plays into it.
Okay, so a couple down from property tax, there's one that's just other tax, and it was 11.6 million in 2022, 8.1 budgeted 23, and then 12.8 for 24-25. So what is that tax line where we're, you know, it's almost 4.5 million additional?
Merchants and manufacturing is the big one, the
Okay.
big piece of that. And 8, a lot, on 23-24, you're gonna see original figures. So that will be some variance between 23-24 and 24-25. But yeah, merchants and manufacturing is by far the largest piece of that. The other piece would be a little bit local assessed railroad and utility.
Okay, so what's listed in the budgeted 23-24, was that from the original budget, not what's been amended so far?
Correct.
Okay,
With the exception of like debt service, where it was a $19 million increase for the prepayment. I did go in and manually do that, yes.
okay, I know do you want me to ask an expense question now? I know we haven't gotten there
Sure,
yet.
yeah, no, that's
Okay,
fine.
so I just have an overall question, and I think that it relates back to how we realize our bond income and expenses, because our budgeted revenue is 329.5 million essentially, and then our expenses are 332 million, 332.7 million. So our expenses are more than our revenue, so we don't have a balanced budget, so it appears. But I know we talked about we have about $5 million in outstanding bonds, so that's not technically revenue because it's essentially just an asset.
100%.
So that 5 million is the bond money that we're going to pay out in the next fiscal year.
Yes, so when you look at our bond, that balance is I projected it at 4.5 million at the end of the fiscal year. So the only revenue piece in that is $30,000 in interest. So that's what you're seeing when you look at revenue. You're seeing $30,000 in interest, but we're gonna spend 4.5. And so that's where that deficit comes in. The other thing that I would say, just when you look at the budget book, if you look at combined expenses, you would say, whoa, wait a minute. We spent 373 million budgeted this year and only 332 million this year, but you're telling us our reserve is gonna go down a little bit. The reason for that is capital projects and bond and the debt service prepayment. So when you look at those factors combined, what you'll see is about a $7 to $8 million increase in total in operating expenses.
Okay.
But that's just looking at the total combined.
Thank you.
All right. So again, expense budget, we see the salary increases that we approved in March. I have budgeted at 1.5% for health insurance. As we get to August, we are going to recommend just a slight increase in the board paid contribution. Right now, knock on wood, our health insurance claims are really looking pretty good for 2024. But just a reminder, that's calendar year 24, so that doesn't go into effect until January 25. Retirement contributions, they stay the same. They've been at that level now for, gosh, probably a decade at least. There was a period where those were going up every year. And then the transfer. So this year we're transferring $6 million. Next year we are still planning to transfer $5 million. That for Lee's Summit is pretty aggressive. But we have capital project needs that we've defined. And those are hard to defer. And we've deferred a lot of them for several years. And so that is something that, you know, when you look at the bond that in 2020, we're just now getting to the portion of that is really capital project related. Maybe we put a roof on, all right? We do a mechanical system at a school. Typically in Lee's Summit, that's not been the historical way that we have used bond funds. There have been some capital project expenses lined up that were ready to go with those bond revenues. So that's part of the reason, and that's something that, you know, we've talked about with our CFMP and the CAC we'll be looking at with the recommendation and ultimately when the board decides. whether or not to go for the bond and how much in April. But regardless, we are recommending a $5 million transfer. What that looks like for the total budget. You can see salary and benefits are the largest piece of it, and that is including all expenses. So that's debt service payments, which is, you can only use debt service for debt service to pay the debt, capital projects and bonds, and then lease purchase loan payments. So if I were to take out general obligation debt, loan payments, and the capital projects and just include materials and supplies, contracted services, salaries and benefits, then salaries and benefits is 82% of that.
And so if you think, when we set our tax rate, you have a debt service tax rate, we have a capital project tax rate, and you have your local tax. Your local tax is going to the operating budget, and that's what 82% of it's going to people, salaries and benefits. We're in the people helping people business. So most districts our size in this area in the 70% range. We're usually at the top, if not sometimes second, but we're always above 80%. We range anywhere from 81 to 85%. Next year we're budgeting, it looks like 82% salary and benefits.
This is just our debt service schedule. That's part of the budget. It's in the larger budget book twice. So you'll see that. Again, if you look at the fiscal year totals, that goes out to 2041. That's because we sold our last piece in 2021. So 24-25 budget. Again, if you want to focus on the two yellow highlighted areas, that is our operating reserve. I will note though, capital projects, again, we're being aggressive. That balance will likely go down to just below 5 million. There may be a little variance in there, but we have projects that need to get done. All right, and so that is a fund that, again, you can build back up in anticipation of the bond. There will be some of those expenses that will be part of that, we believe. So we're comfortable. Normally, we wouldn't want to go down that low, but we're comfortable in this fiscal year cycle doing that.
Nathan, if I would, so you see that top number, he said he's not 100% confident it's gonna be exactly that. It could be a little lower, it could be a little higher. So long as at the end of June 30th, which will really be June 28th for us, because that's a Friday, if everything expense-wise is lower than he has budgeted, we're good. If for some reason one of those comes in a little higher, we would have to amend the budget in July. But even if we don't have to amend the budget in July, there is a true-up, and that's called ASBR.
Right.
So Nathan, can you explain when and what they see in ASBR, what ASBR is? And that's when you'll see the exact percent as of June 30th.
Yeah, so the ASBR is due August 15th, and then ultimately in September when we have our visit from the auditor, they confirm what we have in the ASBR. There are adjustments that can happen to the ASBR, but it's just if money was expensed in Fund 1, for instance, and it should have been Fund 2, vice versa, or capital projects, it should have been Fund 1, it won't change your total expenses. Now, in July, I will be able to tell the Finance Committee for certain, and hopefully we won't have to come back and do a budget amendment, but there always is that possibility. But I'll be able to tell you we're at 27.38, or we're a little lower, or we're a little higher, and here's why. So at the July board meeting, I'll be able to do that because we'll have finished the fiscal year. Then the only variance in that would be, again, if our auditor said, well, that 20,000 really should have been expensed in this fund, that could change the beginning balances. Again, it won't change what we actually spent. It's just all those funds there that you see are part of the Missouri Accounting Manual, and so that's why they're looking at that. Overall, I may be being a little optimistic and incidental to end the fiscal year. We'll see what the next 2 weeks bring. I hope not. I hope I'm pretty spot on and incidental. I can tell you teachers is already slightly higher, $100,000. That doesn't move the needle in our district. But we're actually already just a little bit higher in the teacher revenue fund to end 23-24. That's because we got our state payment today. So I know that's one of the challenges, when you do it, and mid-June and board packets are due, especially in June, we're getting information on a daily basis that changes these numbers. So we make the best educated guess we can, and that's what we present. But in July, those will be firm, and what we spent will be what we spent. And what we received in revenue will be what we received. All right, any other questions?
I just want to elaborate, when he said estimate, just because probably no board members had to do this before. So you are paid by the state on the formula on the best of your 2 prior years or current year. Well, obviously, DESI doesn't know what your current year is until it's done. So they're picking the best of the prior 2. And usually, you have to do it by May 15th. So usually around May 1st, we'll look at it and say, oh, this year is better than the prior 2, that we could receive payment, and we'll do an estimate. We tend to do an estimate and make sure that we're not overestimating, because if you overestimate, you do get to cut a check back to them. But don't worry, even if you underestimate, they eventually will pay you anyways what's right. So they will true up. But if you want it to be true up as close as possible in the current year, you want to do that estimate around May 1st, because you have a May 15th deadline. And the reason why you want to wait later, because it's based on average daily attendance. What if we did it in March and then a whooping cough outbreak happened and our attendance plummeted or something like that? So you want to get as many school days as possible in before you do that estimate.
Yeah, sorry. Can we go back to the budget slide for the 24-25? So in the finance committee meeting, we were talking a little bit about kind of like the what ifs. And so just for the rest of the board, some of the things that I am concerned about is, if the worst case happens, and I know I keep bringing it up, but it could happen, then our fund balance goes from 72 to 40 million, and then we have to live with that. I mean, it would go down like that, and then we'd have to cover that deficit for the next year until we're able to try to recoup some of that with an increase to our tax levy. But even then, that's not gonna, we're still in rebuild even after that, right, Mr. Holder? Like, we would have to still kind of like save that back up in our reserve and cover our expenses as well, which takes time. It would take several years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would at least take 2 for sure, because you're rebuilding in the next fiscal year. And the largest unanswered question is, a recoupment levy is typically based on property taxes that were successfully appealed. So what's happening right now is essentially an appeal for everyone, right? Carte blanche. So it's that's you don't know. I mean,
Right.
you don't know if a recoupment would even be possible. I'm sure that would be answered eventually. Probably by court, but we wouldn't know that right away. And so, yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, if it happened, our reserves would drop to 15%.
Right.
So if I think back to 2008 when the economy crashed, I think at least you and I were in central office at that point. The state was withholding, Governor Nixon at that time was withholding funds from state funding. We were getting paid at 92, 94%. So we had to cut 6% out of the budget. Well, when you're talking 82% of your budget is people, and you still have to pay electric and gas, you can't really cut that. So it was attrition or riffing positions is what districts statewide had to do. That would be what would happen in Jackson County if all of a sudden we had a $30 million hole. We would have to look at, with the board engaging in a process of how do we go about making cuts, and know that majority of that's probably going to be staffing. So is this July 8th court date is the last day for the lawsuit being in court. And then however long it takes to make a judgment, we're watching with pins and needles, because it has a major impact on what we do going forward. But we have time to turn off the water. It's just going to be really painful to do so, and we're not going to be shy about that, because it will be painful. It was painful cutting 6% back in 2009.
Well, that was part of my concern, is what kind of planning are we doing? Because I don't obviously want it to get to the point where this happens and then we're on our heels and we don't even know where to begin. Not that I ever want to think about that piece, but it could be a reality. So I just want to make sure we're prepared and that we as a board are prepared, because that's going to be really rough for the community. And there's nowhere we can there's not one thing we could cut and just be like, here's $30 million.
Correct.
So, I mean, there's
So-
going to be some other cost containment measures where maybe there's some chipping away at some things that add up to dollars, but really evaluating what is a necessity and what is nice to have.
So our staff who hear the word cost containment, that probably has a trigger word,
I'm
'cause that's a
sorry,
term
I
used back in the
didn't,
day.
I didn't mean to
So,
panic. I
that's
don't
not
want
a-
to panic anybody.
So,
I'm
but
just-
here's what we did, what I did where I was at during that time, because that was statewide then. We came to the board and said, let's prioritize what types of things would kind of last versus first. Then we asked community members, staff members, everybody we could, hey, generate ideas. And we put it on, even if it was a dumb idea. Like somebody asked, don't answer the phone 1 day a week. I don't know how it saves you money. In fact, I think it would tick your people off and it's unsafe. But we put it on the list. We had a list of like 200 and something things. And we did analysis on, does it save money? Does it cost us in other ways? And how does it fit into that filter the board approved ahead of time? And then from that, we just started engagement pieces with staff and community members. If you had to cut X dollars, what would you cut on this list of 250 things? If you had to cut 5 things, what would you cut? If you wanted to save 5 things on the list, what would you save? And then from that bubbled up to, we had a 6% cut that the board made. So it was about an 8 to 9 month engagement, and we would have the time to do probably a 6 to 7 month engagement probably on this one, depending on when the judge would come out with it, to do that piece. So we would have time to do that, but it would be what we do as a board, and me and Nathan and Steve, that would be a huge piece of what we go forward. So
is there anything we need to do right now to
No.
make sure that if that is something in the playbook we have to pull out, that we're ready to do that? Is there anything that we are not doing right now to be prepared?
No, I think we're good. We're
Okay.
good. And I can share with you the entire plan. Right now, there's another superintendent got it from me, so I have a big giant binder of that process I did. I can get that back from her. She was worried about she might have to do cuts. She doesn't. So I will get that back from her, and I can share that with you. But it would be a collaborative process. Let things come to the top and do as much attrition as possible. By attrition, I mean somebody retires and we say, can we cover this with existing, or do we have to replace? Because it's easier to do it through attrition than it is to riff. If you riff a position, if that person is not certified to do something else that you have an opening for, the next 2 years, if any position opens that they're qualified for, they automatically get it if they want it. And that can cause some hurt feelings, like, oh, you didn't want me now, but now you have to take me back. So we'd rather do attrition than RIF. You have a board policy on RIF, reduction in force,
Yep.
is what RIF stands for. But yes, unfortunately, we've been through this back in 2008, 09. It's been a while, but we can have a roadmap for that. The interesting piece here is we may lose money and then get it back, because this lawsuit basically was already heard by the Missouri, or part of it was by the Missouri Supreme Court, which threw it out, which wasn't part of the Attorney General. So there's a weird interplay with that piece too, that even if the county loses, there may be an appeal to the Missouri Supreme Court, which just set precedent last December, that may undo it. So
Yeah.
we might have to cut a check back and then get a check back. So that's also, we want to make sure that plays out too, and not cut people's positions and then get the money back and say, oh, we didn't have to do that. So that's going to be the weird interplay with that.
Oh, okay. I don't know. No, I hear you, and I've thought through that as well, and I don't necessarily think this is the best idea, but I mean, we obviously still have the option of raising our levy in September, which I don't really want to do, but then it would be kind of a buffer, and then we have the flexibility to lower that back
Yes.
once we have some certainty. But I also don't necessarily think that feels not great to me as well after, our April ballot issue the previous year and what we agreed to do with the voters, and now we're in a situation where we'd have to raise it back up. So that doesn't feel great, but I suppose it's always an option.
Probably not fair to Nathan, but when we rolled back something around 60 cents, it was over $20 million we said we're not collecting that we could collect.
Yeah.
So you're right, you do have that lever you could do. I don't know if I'd advise that. What's interesting about that, so, we are about $5 million short from local funds, about a quarter of that amount. So really, if we had rolled back 45 cents instead of 60, we'd be right where we should be. But we didn't know that. We didn't know we were going to be $5 million short based on all the appeals and such. So that is in your option as a board. I don't know if I would recommend that at
I'm
this
not
time.
recommending it either, but I just know it's out there, and maybe once we have some more clarity, because it's June, we have until September, maybe we'll have some more clarity. And I wouldn't do that or say we should do that unless it was absolutely necessary for us to be able to pay our bills. So,
And I do want to say, and make sure the board is aware of this, and Dr. Shelton could probably speak to this as well. Yes, if something happened that was drastic, there are levers we could pull, and we would still have a balance. But it's also important to recognize that we are in a position where we are very cognizant of the fact that you can't just add, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we won't do something different or something new, but if we do, we have to take a look at, okay, is there a way that we can balance that out? And so it's not a new allocation, it's a reallocation. And so we are already undergoing that process because we knew that 1920, the pandemic provision was going away. The new formula, if it's fully funded, will help mitigate some of that. But the bottom line is our enrollment is overall stagnant. And so that's something that we recognize. And again, that doesn't mean we won't come to you with something new. And pre-K is obviously new, but there's a revenue source at least behind that. It's the initial expense that you have to cover. But overall, as part of the big picture, that is something that we recognize internally and have been talking quite a bit about really over the last 18 months, but especially that's been ramped up now. And that's regardless of what happens with the suit.
yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up again, because I know we talked about in the finance committee meeting, that we're trying to be really responsible with where we put our dollars and make sure it's something we actually really need for the district. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Something Dr. Buck touched on was the transfer. Nathan mentioned the transfer as well. So those are some other levers we can pull back. We're going to transfer $6 million this year. We have a budgeted $5 million transfer next year. We can not transfer some or all of that. The M&M replacement tax we put into capital. We can put that into incidental, into our operating. Now, there's a cost with that, and now all of a sudden we don't have money to do some of the deferred maintenance and other capital projects. But, if we go to the voters in April and pass a bond, then maybe we could offset some of that lost revenue through those sources with our bond proceeds, and then still do those projects and that maintenance and repair that need to be done. So there are some levers. One thing we didn't talk about, and not that I would recommend it, but there's a tax anticipation note, a TAN. By chance, if something came down quickly, we could, and we had to pay, but we were getting to November, December, and we needed additional funds for payroll or whatever. We could get a TAN until our property taxes started coming in to give us some cash flow into that. So
Is that like a loan?
yeah.
Like an
Yeah.
advance on your tax revenue?
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, and to be honest with you, many states, it's occasionally done in Missouri. Many states, though, it's just part of the a philosophy and approach towards school funding. There are districts around the state, around the country that prefer to have a really low reserve. We try to keep it up, above 25, but there are some places that really like to keep it low, but to do that, keep it low, they've got to run a tax anticipation mode every year, and it's just part of their normal business.
Don't we have a legal threshold that we have to keep our
There is
reserve?
a financially stressed level, and it's like 2%, 4%, it's 3%.
Oh, that's
Look at
really
that, it's
low.
all around at 3% reserves. The amount of reserves you need to not borrow money to make payroll in December, probably for us actually be November, because we do start receiving funds in December now. It used to be you always got it in January and February from local, but now we do get a significant amount in December because people are paying their taxes and they're doing weekly payments to us. Differs. The more you're reliant on the state, since that's more normalized throughout the 12 months, the less percent reserves you need to have to make payroll before you start getting your local. For us, we have, this year it was 25%, I think it was on the previous screen, it's 26% of our revenues predicted to be state next year. We have to have a bigger percent. Now that percent differs by year, what you'd need to not borrow money, but I would say it's probably a little less than 20%, around 20% is my guess. Just doing napkin math really quick in my head, but, so that's why we set 25%, so we know we're safe in case something weird happens where $5 million doesn't come in.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Does anybody have any additional questions before we vote? Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Okay, motion passes.
Okay, item 6, items for decision, consent.
Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Second.
All right, motion and second. Do we have any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Motion passes.
7.01, Electrical Corporation of America contract.
Can I get a motion?
I move that the board approve a contract for the intercom system replacement at Meadow Lane to Electrical Corporation of America at a total cost of $32,786 as detailed.
Second.
All right, and we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or concerns before we vote?
No question, but I'm the one who pulled this to decision. I have a professional relationship with ECA, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. All those who abstain,
Aye.
motion passes.
Okay. Items of information, written reports, 9.01, board metrics, spring and NWEA data.
You can do all 6 together and then ask if anybody's got a question on all 6 if you wish.
All right, does anybody have any questions or concerns about items 9.01 through 9.06?
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's right, we're not voting on that. Okay. 10.01, public comments, and we don't have any.
Okay. On that note, on behalf of the LSR7 Board of Education and staff, we want to extend our condolences to the Lee Summit Fire Department, who recently lost 2 members of their family. Our thoughts are with you. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.